I bring us to item 7.1, which is Notice of Motion, Councillor Watts, Julian Assange. I'm now calling on John Shipton to speak for no more than 3 minutes. Thank you, John.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you, councillors, and for the opportunity to speak. Julian is a child of Melbourne University, Thornbury and Carlton, at the moment in dire circumstance in a prison, in a maximum security prison in England. Melbourne Council will join a noble group of the European Council, the European Assembly, the European Commission of Human Rights, the United Nations Commission of Human Rights, the United Nations Rapporteur on Torture, the United Nations Rapporteur on Privacy, the United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention. All of these European and international bodies asked for the non-extradition of Julian and his freedom. So Melbourne will join this powerful international movement of considerable prestige in Julian's matter. I thank you very much for allowing me these few moments to speak and wish you all well. Bye-bye.
Thank you, John. We appreciate your participation and the points you've made. I'm calling firstly on Chris Thrum, who requested the opportunity to address the committee in relation to this matter, to speak for no longer than 3 minutes. And Chris, just to note, we are coming back to you at the end for your follow-up questions on Treasury Square and the restaurant. But Chris Thrum, over to you on this motion.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you, we can.
First of all, I'd like to thank Councillor Jackie Watts for bringing forward this very important motion in regards to a citizen who spent a long time in the city of Melbourne. Mr Julian Assange founded WikiLeaks supposedly in a residency in Carlton. And being Carlton, that is, of course, adjacent to the city of Melbourne and under the purview of Melbourne City Council. I think it's important to emphasise too that I'd like to thank Councillor Rohan Leppert for seconding this motion and supporting Councillor Jackie Watts as well. I think we've got to be concerned about the well-being of Mr Julian Assange. He's under lockdown 23 hours out of 24 hours under a strict regime. He's under very difficult circumstances and he needs the support of the City of Melbourne. It's appropriate that we recognise that Amnesty International have asked the UK not to extradite Mr Julian Assange to the United States of America. I think it's appropriate too that I support the recommendation from management that the Prime Minister Scott Morrison and or the Foreign Minister Maurice Payne write to the UK and express the serious concerns we have about the well-being of Mr Julian Assange. In conclusion, I'd like to thank again Jackie Watts for the detailed work that she put into this report and this sort of notice of motion. And it's an incredible amount of support that Mr Julian Assange has. And I think it's very important that the councillors, the Lord Mayor and the Deputy Lord Mayor Aaron Wood support Mr Julian Assange in this moment of need for him. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Chris. I'm now calling on Camillo De Luca to speak for no more than 3 minutes, please. Camillo.
Hi, thank you to everyone. My name's Camillo. I'm from the official Australia Assange campaign and also from the Australians for Assange group based in Melbourne. I want to stress that this motion is about protecting Mr Assange's human rights, his rights to a fair trial and proper treatment, especially in regard to his poor health. Let me start by saying most Australians are completely unaware of what is going on with Julian. Now, this is largely due to the lack of media coverage in Australia. There's an incredible list of international organisations screaming out human rights abuses, but we never hear about them in Australia, so very few people are up to speed with the abuses of the legal process in this case. Because of this, there's hardly a whimper of support from his own country. Let me say, without the support of Australia, Julian has no hope of getting proper justice. I'd like to quote Professor Neil Smelter, who is the Human Rights Chair of the Geneva Academy of International Humanitarian Law and Human Rights. He is also Professor of International Law at the University of Glasgow, and he is the United Nations Special Rapporteur on torture and other cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment, which is quite a list. He says, in 20 years of work with victims of war, violence and political persecution, I have never seen a group of democratic states ganging up to individually isolate, demonise and abuse a single individual for such a long time and with so little regard for human dignity and rule of law. Let me reiterate those 2 points, human dignity and rule of law. Julian is being held in the most notorious maximum security Belmarsh prison in London. He is held 23.5 hours a day, 7 days a week in solitary confinement. He has been in these conditions for over 14 months. He hasn't been allowed a single visitor for, I think, 3 months since a prison coronavirus lockdown. Julian is serving no sentence. He's not a prisoner. He's simply on remand and being detained pending his trial. He has a presumption of innocence, yet he continues to be treated as though already convicted. He is a non-violent, gentle person. He poses no threat, yet he's being detained in the most violent prison in the United Kingdom. According to Professor Melter, the conditions of his detention do not comply with international laws and amount to psychological torture. His health is failing. He has chronic lung condition. He is suffering from depression. According to Doctors for Assange, a group that consists of over 220 doctor signatories, Julian's life is in real danger and he could die in prison. As everyone else has said, Julian is an Australian citizen. He was a Melbourne resident before he moved to England for work. He studied at the University of Melbourne, lived in Carlton. He's entitled to proper, fair justice and treatment. The City of Melbourne can help support proper justice, as it has in other cases, by expressing its concern for Julian's case. June 26, which is this Friday, I believe is International Day of Support of Victims of Torture, as expressed by the United Nations and many other international humanitarian organisations. Julian is a victim of torture. This motion expresses concerns to the Australian Federal Government to ensure that Julian's rights are not abused. I ask everyone to put aside any reservations they might have to support the principles of this motion in the interest of fairness and proper treatment of every Australian. Thank you very much.
Camillo, thank you. Thank you for that. And look, I gather that people can't hear our bell. It's a very high-tech way of bringing people to the end of their time. But Camillo, thank you for that. We do have one other speaker this evening, Gaetano Greco. Thank you.
Hello, this is Gaetano. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Please go ahead.
Okay, hi. Look, hi everyone. Look, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak. As some of you may know, I'm a councillor at the City of Darebin, but tonight I'll be speaking in a private capacity, and I thank you for allowing me to make a submission. Also, I'd like to congratulate the council for considering this notice of motion that's been put forward by Jackie Watts, and I hope that the councils will give it some serious consideration. As some of you may know, the Darebin City Council back in November last year passed a similar motion to what you're considering here tonight, and we unanimously endorsed that motion in order to support Julian Assange and to support his plight in relation to the mistreatment that he is currently facing, and also in regards to the abuse of human rights in respect to him. Why did we do this? Well, Julian Assange was not only a resident of Carlton, but he also was a resident of Thornbury, which is part of the Darebin municipality. And as a result, we thought that we would lend our support, as we're only a very small council, but we would lend our support to the cause of Julian Assange in order to send a message to the federal government that they need to do more in relation to advocating on his behalf. I won't go through all the reasons of why I think we should support Julian Assange. I think John Shipton and Camillo covered that adequately enough. But the only point that I would just make is that, again, as a council, as a Darebin Council, we thought that given that we abide by human rights and we support that citizens should be respected and that due process should be applied, we thought that we needed to come out as a council, given that he was a Darebin resident, and to lend our support to the international campaign that is out there in support of Julian Assange. So I'm hoping that the council, as the Darebin Council has done, will support the motion that's been put forward by Jackie Watts to support Julian Assange, and that's because I think the more representations that are made to the federal government, the better it will be to allow an Australian citizen who's an award-winning journalist to receive proper justice and fair treatment in relation to the trial that he'll be facing later in September. Again, look, thank you for listening, and I really hope that the Melbourne City Council, and on behalf of all Melbournians, can also advocate to the federal government in regards to Julian Assange. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Gaetano. Thank you for your contribution. Well, that concludes our speakers on this motion. I'm going to call on Councillor Watts to move the motion, and Councillor Leppert is seconding the motion. Noted. Over to you, Councillor Watts.
Thank you, Lord Mayor. I'm really impressed by the eloquence with which this whole matter has been discussed or put forward by the people who've taken the time to engage with us tonight, and I personally am moved by the fact that Julian Assange's father spoke to us tonight. It's a very emotional position to find oneself in, I'm sure, to have one's son in such a situation. But I'm here to speak for the City of Melbourne. But first of all, I want everybody to understand that I didn't put this motion together on my own. I had the very able support of Councillor Leppert and Councillor Rees, and I'm grateful for their efforts, and I'm sure Julian Assange will be grateful for their efforts too, should my colleagues agree that this is some important progress for the case of defending a Melburnian in this dire situation. This, in essence, is an issue has already been put forward. This is about freedom of the press. This is about human rights. This is about civil society and the rule of the law. And all of those things, of course, matter to us in Melbourne as a city council. We are a civil society, and we expect that the law will be upheld. We expect that our citizens will be subject to due process. We expect that they will not be abused in the way in which Julian Assange is being abused at the moment. We look to our federal government to step up in this situation and defend its citizens. And if this isn't happening at the moment, well, perhaps it will listen to a council such as ours. We have an obligation to step up when we see such abuses occurring. This is a city which respects the intellectual endeavours of journalists. This city relies on a degree of transparency which our investigative journalists provide for us. We don't resile from uncomfortable information coming to light. We applaud those who can shine a light on things that would suit the interests of others to remain hidden. So on a number of levels, I think this is an important step forward for this city, and I hope that my colleagues see it as I do. So I have said all that I need to say. Councillor Leppert.
Thank you, Councillor Watts. Over to you, Councillor Leppert.
Thank you, Lord Mayor, and thank you, Councillor Watts, for moving the motion and for letting me work with you on putting the motion together. I think this is a really important thing to do, and the timing is actually critical. So I'm glad that we're having this debate tonight. Thank you, Chris, and all submitters as well. It's really important to hear 4 submissions in strong support of the motion, and thank you for the care you've put into those submissions. In 2011, WikiLeaks received an award from the Walkley Foundation for Most Outstanding Contribution to Journalism. Today, he's in Belmarsh Prison in the UK in the midst of extradition hearings related to publications that the Walkley Foundation awarded him for. This is a farce. The extradition hearings have been disrupted and delayed, and the risks of death and serious illness in prisons is higher in a pandemic than at usual times, and at usual times those risks are of course already very high. We know that Mr Assange is in very poor health. We know that Belmarsh is the highest category security prison and that his access to support and sunlight is negligible. We know he doesn't have the Australian government's support, and that is outrageous for any Australian citizen. His life is in serious danger. He could die there, and he's there on remand, not as a prisoner convicted of any crime. The country he's being held by is the United Kingdom, and the country attempting to extradite him is the United States, and these are 2 of our closest allies. This relationship means nothing at all if our government won't stand up for the human rights of one of its own citizens, and if those 2 allies don't respect the interventions of our government. Mr Assange should be released on bail if need be. Our government does not need to agree with Mr Assange's methods, and we know that they don't. And there's probably many councillors, myself included, on a number of matters that don't agree with some of what Mr Assange might do or be or presents as a human. That is not on what we're considering here. But we have to demand that our government upholds the human rights of one of its citizens that's unjustly imprisoned. Julian lived in Carlton, in the city of Melbourne, and this is a city that champions freedom of speech and freedom of the press. It also is a city that takes its responsibilities to uphold the human rights of its citizens very seriously. We painstakingly reviewed our own local laws to ensure compliance with the Victorian Charter of Human Rights and to protect the rights and dignity of Melburnians. It is not enough for us to do that work and to consider that what is happening to Australian citizens, including former Melburnians, outside our own boundaries is not our business. The abuse of the rights of one Australian should be the concern of all Australians. This motion alone isn't going to cause the government to act. I'd love it to, but let's admit that it probably won't. Is that a reason not to do it? Of course not. There's a global mass movement calling on the UK and the US governments to abandon their punitive, cruel and unjust actions. But we have to keep adding to that collective call for action until our government does act. And we can't settle for less. So let's join civil society groups, local, provincial and national governments, UN advisory bodies and everyone who believes in human rights and take a stand.
Thank you, Councillor Leppert. I am going to ask for the indulgence of the committee in some way because we had a request to speak, but we didn't get it registered, and it's on this item. And so Walter Malado, if he is there, we would like to give him the opportunity to make his presentation on this item, because to do so at the end of the meeting it doesn't have the same value. So Walter, I'm calling out just to see if you are there.
Yes, hello, thank you. Thank you very much
well
for your flexibility.
It's all right, you've got
really
3 minutes, so go for it. Yep.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you. Firstly, thank you, Jackie Watts, Councillors Jackie Watts and Rohan Leppert for bringing up this very, very important motion that that we hope succeeds tonight. I wholeheartedly support and agree with everything John, Gaetano, Camillo, and all the other people supporting this motion have covered off today, this evening. Julian was raised in Melbourne, as you heard earlier, in his formative years, and attended uni here in Carlton, and that's where he created the world-leading publishing and whistleblower site WikiLeaks, which I just want to highlight is really the platform that gave the people of the world, the people of Melbourne, the people of Australia, the people everywhere, just general public, gave them a platform, a media platform in which they could securely and privately publish documentation that's in the public interest without danger, with limited danger to their own safety. He's a Walkley Award-winning journalist, as we touched on earlier. He's also a Nobel Peace Prize nominee many times over, including this year again. It's important, and importantly, he's an Australian citizen. He's an Australian citizen who's been detained without charge for almost 10 years now. Julian's a good man with really good intentions. He's made the ultimate sacrifice and is paying the ultimate price for trying to help make the world a better place. That's his crime, if any. Every poll I've seen over the years, public poll, overwhelmingly supports Julian, and there's a petition at the moment, which was created by Phillip Adams, that's garnered almost 500,000 signatures and growing in support of Julian. So there is a lot of public support out there for Julian, for what he stands for and what he's done. He hasn't broken any laws. He isn't charged with anything at the moment. The US are trying to get him over there to drop these charges, these baseless charges on him. And we as a society, we as Australians, we really need to stand up for someone who's sacrificed so much for us. I implore you, as a council, I implore you to pass this motion, and thank you very much for your time this evening.
Thanks, Walter. Thanks for your submission. Well, councillors, we've had, 5 submissions. We've had the motion moved, we've had the motion seconded, so I'm now looking for other councillors who would like to speak to the motion. Councillor Rees.
Thank you very much, Lord Mayor. And can I also thank Councillor Jackie Watts for bringing this motion forward, to Councillor Leppert for helping to craft it, and thank you for inviting me to help be involved in the drafting of the words as well. Look, there's 3 reasons why I support this motion. First is because Julian Assange studied in Melbourne, was a resident here in Melbourne. He is a Melburnian, and by its very nature, we are biased people. We support Melburnians, and so whether you're an international student, whether you're an artist, whether you're a resident, whether you're a business, we will where we can step up and help you. And Julian Assange is a Melburnian who needs help. The second reason is because I think there's an important principle around journalistic freedom that's at stake here, and I say that as someone who is a working journalist. We have a situation where Julian Assange is being extradited from the UK to the US under an unprecedented provision in the Espionage Act for essentially engaging in journalistic activity. He was being a journalist, and for that, if he's convicted, he faces up to 175 years of imprisonment or potentially the death penalty. So I just have to speak out when confronted by that. The third thing is just out of the basic principle of respect for human rights, something which I think in a liberal democracy like ours, democracy and the rule of law is and procedural justice is absolutely fundamental to everything that we stand for, and those basics of our society are not being afforded to Julian Assange. The United Nations Working Group, as we have heard, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture has examined this case and believes that his life is in danger and that his human rights are being violated. Amnesty International have also examined the case, and they believe that there is a fundamental breach of international human rights law that is occurring here. And so, for those reasons, he's a Melburnian because of the principles of journalistic freedom and because of the basic respect for human rights, which is not being observed here. I will be voting for this motion.
Other speakers to the motion? Councillor Oak.
Thanks, Lord Mayor. Oh gosh, sorry, for some reason it's very cold up here tonight. I thank the mover and seconder for, and also Councillor Rees for bringing this motion here and for the huge amount of work. And I think it's, a very good motion that has been put forward, and it clearly articulates the reason why we should be supporting it. I've been listening to a lot of people emphasise, the fact that he's a Melburnian, and that's the reason why we should be supporting it. To me, it's kind of it's irrelevant whether he's from Melbourne or not. It's human rights abuse. It's against journalistic, freedom. There matters, the matters that have been brought to light about the conditions that he's in, and the spurious charges that he's being held against just to, extradite him to the US are obviously very concerning, and, any Australian citizen should have the full support of the Australian government in this situation. So it's kind of irrelevant whether he's from Melbourne or not, and to me it's really more about standing up on a principle. And, I understand that the Melburnian component is being emphasised because we're being accused of not necessarily, why are we as a city council putting forward something that is essentially an international or a national issue. I think Councillor Watts probably articulated it best. It's that, the city of Melbourne is a city for freedom and transparency and for, upholding human rights. And so that in itself should be a reason why we should support this, regardless of whether he is from Melbourne or whether, he's from Darebin or, wherever he is from. We should be, standing up for what we believe in terms of what appears to be, and what is obviously apparent from a lot of our supporters who know it much more personally than we do. It's, these are significant human rights that are being contravened, and we should be of concern. We should be concerned for this, and if support from the City of Melbourne goes in any small, way to the cause, to, having him released without having to die in jail, which is what is obviously, which is what the concern is at the moment, let alone the consequences of any extradition, then we certainly should be adding the full support of the City of Melbourne. But it's important for me to note that, and it's because I strongly support and believe in human rights, that it is important for me to note that that any and all sexual assault allegations need to be taken seriously, regardless of the justice system, and the rights of accusers and the accused do need to be respected. And that is the one aspect of the reporting around this that I do actually have a lot of concern with, that it is put aside when, not commenting in any way. I don't know the facts, but I don't, appreciate that aspect of how it is reported.
Thanks, Councillor Oak. Councillor Francis Gilly.
Thank you. And sorry, first to John Shipton, thank you for your presentation. I cannot imagine how it must feel to be in a situation where you feel so helpless to be able to support your child. And you do that with extraordinary grace, and I'm completely moved and honoured that you spoke to us tonight. Thank you. To Councillor Watts, I think I'm going to have to. I'm conservative. I'm not really very often conservative, but for me, I was really conservative about this, thinking this is not our job. We're a council. This is not our job. And so I want to acknowledge that I think I would have rather this hadn't been here. tonight. And I want to thank you for your stubbornness and your commitment and your pushing to have this here, because actually we fund all the time the things that we think support the culture of this city. Art, Aboriginal culture, or making it a knowledge city, all the things that we can then be proud of. And I am not proud right now of the way I had held this, because actually it is really important that when things of national import change the culture of the place that you live in, regardless of his particular connection to Julian's particular connection to Melbourne, that it is important for us, because we have a role to uphold that culture, speak out about that. And so I am now, first of all, sorry that I didn't get it, and I am really grateful for you bringing it. And I am, it is very clear to me that it is our business to speak to those things that absolutely are the pillars of our society: justice, freedom of speech, the freedom of the press. And this, in its nature, is not meeting a very high bar on any of those issues, and as such we should speak about it. So thank you, Councillor Leppert, thank you, Councillor Rees, for your work on this, and I will look forward to supporting the motion.
Other speakers to this motion? Councillor Leppert.
I actually really struggle with this one, because I think, same to you, Nick, our place in this, as someone who loves international affairs, it's something that I've always observed, and I've always said I think there's a lot more information and things that we probably would not know that I think we would, because I would like to base my vote purely on everything I've seen. And obviously I can't really see of it. But I do recognise that I think I have been persuaded, and it's always so often. But I think also the fact that, a lot of really good arguments by my fellow colleagues that I was going to abstain, because I think, I didn't want to vote for, but I think I didn't want to vote against as well. As many people know my position on certain of these things. But I think in this instance, I think hearing, some of these things, especially as a Melburnian, I do think there is that connection there, and I think, being abstaining on that, I think would not really qualify. I do note that it doesn't go into the very much detail, rather you just say, as a Melburnian, as an Australian, it's a very fundamental rule of law, and also the fact that we support someone who is considered Melburnian, and then get the rest issues dealt with afterwards. I think it's the absolute principle and fundamental. So,
thank you, Councillor Leppert. Anyone else? No? Well, Councillor Riley.
I've given this a lot of thought over the last few days, and I have spoken to Councillor Watson. I do appreciate all the work that she has put in to bring this to our attention. And I do truly, truly sympathise with the fact that Julian is in a very unsafe prison, and he is having mental issues as well as health issues. I also think to myself that this, yes, he was an acclaimed journalist, but he was also a rogue journalist, and he caused a lot of issues throughout the world with what he printed. And yes, we can talk about freedom of the press, but by doing that, he also caused a lot of damage. Now, I don't think anyone expected him to be punished in this way, but it has happened, and I just feel that this is not a local government issue. I feel that this sits fairly in the hands of our Prime Minister and our Minister for Foreign Affairs. And there is pressure from all of the people that Councillor Watt has listed to put forward to the Australian government, and it is their responsibility to make this step. Yes, we can support it, but I just believe that this is not a local government issue.
All right. Well, I'm going to speak to the matter as well. I don't think there are any other speakers at this point. And I acknowledge those points. I think for many of us, we've struggled on the basis, is this something that should be on a local government agenda? And I think the other thing that certainly concerned me is I don't know enough about it, believe it or not. There are so many conflicting views about right, wrong, what's happened, what should have happened, what damage has been caused, what hasn't, etc. And I don't believe that we can have opinions on that, frankly, because we're not close enough to it. But what did become compelling for me is that Julian is a Melburnian at the end of the day, that the role of the media has never been more important in our society as it is today for healthy democracies. But what has always been important in our communities, our societies and our government is the rule of law and human rights. They are enshrined in what makes us human, but also operate as democracies and operate well. And as a lawyer, I was taught on day one, basically, that in applying the law, we must uphold the law. And the things that concern me and what are brought out in this motion is the fact that the rights and the laws that should be able to be relied upon by an individual who is an Australian citizen and a Melburnian are at question, and sufficiently, I think, for me to be able to support the motion this evening. And so I will be voting in favour. If there are no other speakers, I'm putting the motion to the vote. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Councillor Watts, Councillor Leppert, Councillor Francis Gilly, Councillor Leloup, Councillor Deputy Lord Mayor, Councillor Wood, Councillor Oak, Councillor Louis, Councillor Cap, Councillor Rees. I was trying to go in a circle. Did I get everybody? Yes? Yeah, and voting against? I said Councillor Leppert, yep. Voting against, Councillor Riley. So that's the majority in favour, and so that motion is carried. Thanks, councillors, for the debate.
Sorry, Lord Mayor, I'm abstaining from voting.
Oh, do you know what? I knew there was something. I'm so sorry, Councillor Pinder. So the votes against, the votes abstaining. Anyone abstaining is Councillor Pinder. So if we could please note that for the record. And so on that count, there are 9 in favour, 1 against and 1 abstaining. Is that all noted? Good. Thank you. All right, we move on to items.